Story 1. My name is Joe Miller, and I have been a trucker for almost 15 years. Back in 2017, something happened that still haunts me to this day. I was hauling a load of appliances overnight through the Mojave Desert in California, heading toward Arizona. I cannot remember all the details about the cargo, but what sticks with me is how utterly dark and desolate it was out there. The headlights on my truck were dim at the time, a problem I had been procrastinating on fixing for months. Normally, I could manage just fine, but with no other cars around, the poor visibility became painfully obvious. The road stretched ahead in almost complete darkness, and I found myself straining my eyes to make out the way every few minutes. I debated pulling over to wait for the sunrise, but I needed the money and decided to press on, thinking the straight road would keep me safe enough. It was probably an hour before sunrise when I spotted something in the distance. At first, it seemed like it could be an animal, so I slammed on the brakes. As my truck screeched to a halt, I realized it was not an animal at all. It was a car. A red sedan, to be exact, parked dead center on the double yellow lines with its hazard lights flashing. The weirdest part? The passenger door was wide open. My truck stopped just short of hitting it. My first thought was that someone might need help. I am no stranger to dicey situations, but this did not feel threatening, just odd. I threw the truck into reverse, parked it safely on the shoulder, and got out to investigate. The night was eerily still, with no wind and a deafening silence broken only by the rhythmic click of the car's hazard lights. As I approached, I noticed the car was a relatively new Ford Fusion. Peering inside, I saw that the vehicle was completely empty. I checked every possible spot where someone might be hiding, even the back seat, but no one was there. That is when a chill crept up my spine. What kind of person leaves their car abandoned in the middle of the road like that, doors open and all? I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting someone to jump out at me from the shadows. The faint beam of my truck's headlights barely lit the area, and the sheer darkness made me feel vulnerable. Against my better judgment, I decided to keep investigating. The keys were still in the ignition, though the engine was off. I thought about checking the trunk. It seemed logical at the time. When I tried to open it, it was locked. Grabbing the keys from the ignition, I unlocked the trunk, but it still would not budge. It was jammed. Determined, I climbed into the back seat and reached for the trunk's interior latch. Finally, it opened. Inside, I found 3 black garbage bags and a length of rope tied tightly around them. The bags were small, but the whole setup felt unsettling. I was about to take a closer look when a deafening gunshot shattered the silence. I hit my head on the roof of the car in panic and scrambled out as fast as I could. That is when I heard someone shouting from the darkness, their voice raspy and aggressive, yelling, "Hey!" In the dim light, I saw him, a short, stocky guy with red hair, wearing overalls and tall boots. In one hand, he held a shovel, and in the other, a hunting rifle. His expression was not crazed but oddly worried, like he was pleading with me. He yelled, "Wait," over and over, but I was not about to stick around. I dove back into my truck and started it up, praying it would not stall. As I pulled away, I looked back in my mirror and saw him running after me, only to turn back toward his car when he realized he could not catch up. The relief did not last long. A few minutes later, headlights appeared in the distance behind me, rapidly closing in. My stomach dropped when I realized it was the same car. He honked wildly and tailgated me for miles. In a panic, I called the police and tried to explain what was happening. After about 15 minutes of this terrifying chase, the red sedan swerved in front of me and hit the brakes. I thought for sure I was going to crash, but just then, flashing blue and red lights appeared up ahead. The guy veered off the road and disappeared into the desert. When the officer finally reached me, I told him everything. Instead of chasing after the guy, the cop decided to take my statement. I was furious, telling him that they might still catch the guy if they acted quickly, but he just assured me they would look into it and sent me on my way. I never heard back from the police. To this day, I do not know what was in those bags, but I can only guess. My friends have all sorts of theories, ranging from buried bodies to bizarre animal rituals. Whatever the truth, that night changed me. Now, I think twice before driving through the desert at night, no matter how desperate I am. Story 2. I am Jack Taylor, and I guess you could say I am part of the younger crowd in the trucking world. If you spend any time on social media, you have probably seen those videos where truckers share their routines or give tips to others in the trade. For me, those clips pop up constantly on TikTok and YouTube Shorts. I never thought I would end up as a trucker, honestly. I had to drop out of a well-respected university due to some personal issues, and people are always saying I could have done more with my life. But trucking is not such a bad gig. I have been doing this for a little over 2 years now, and I can say the hardest part of the job is not the driving. It is the isolation. You do not really know how the loneliness will mess with your head until you experience it firsthand. My advice? Make peace with whatever demons you have, because they will find you out there on those long, empty highways. This story happened about 3 months after I got hired by my first trucking company. I was as green as they come. That night, I was driving a route from southern New Jersey to Lafayette, Indiana, a 12-hour haul. What made it worse was that I had just finished an 8-hour trip earlier that day. I was pushing myself hard, wanting to finish deliveries quickly, so I decided to drive through the night and reach Lafayette around 3 in the morning. At first, everything was going smoothly. The roads were practically empty, so I let the truck cruise a little faster than normal. About halfway through the trip, I reached for a Red Bull in my center console, only to realize I had forgotten to restock. I smacked the dashboard and groaned. I hate stopping during a drive. Something about sitting idle, even for a few seconds, makes me feel 10 times more exhausted. But I knew I had no choice. Either stop and grab an energy drink or risk falling asleep behind the wheel. Eventually, I spotted what looked like a service stop and pulled in. It was not until I parked the truck that I realized it was no real service station. Just an old, abandoned gas station and what looked like a repurposed convenience store. The whole place gave off bad vibes, but I figured I would check it out anyway. The door to the store swung open easily, and inside, it was pitch dark. At first, I thought about turning around, but then I noticed a faint light coming from the back corner. My curiosity got the better of me, and I walked toward it. The glow was coming from a small room at the back of the store, where a refrigerator was plugged into the wall. I opened the fridge, hoping to find something cold to drink, but it was completely empty, gutted, in fact, with no shelves or anything. As I stood there, I was almost sure I heard a noise out in the main room, like something hitting the floor. My heart skipped a beat. I froze, listening. Was someone else in the building? After a few tense moments, I convinced myself I was imagining things. I cautiously stepped back into the main room, looked around, and saw nothing. Not wanting to waste any more time, I left the store and jogged over to another shop I had seen further up the road. Thankfully, it was open. I grabbed a drink, paid, and hurried back to my truck, still feeling uneasy. Before I climbed in, I glanced back at the old store. That is when I noticed something that sent a chill down my spine. The door was wide open. I was sure I had closed it. Trying to shake off the creepy feeling, I got back on the road. The caffeine started kicking in, and I felt more alert, but my mind kept wandering back to that abandoned store. I could not stop thinking about how weird it all was. Then, out of nowhere, I noticed movement in my rearview mirror. The curtain separating the cab from the sleeper area was swaying, even though I had not turned on the air conditioning. My stomach dropped. Was someone in my truck? I started sweating as my mind raced. I had no weapons, nothing to defend myself with. Desperately, I punched in the nearest police station on my GPS. The next 20 minutes were the longest of my life. Every second, I expected someone to lunge at me or try to grab the wheel. When I finally reached the police station, I parked as close as I could, jumped out, and sprinted inside. Within minutes, officers surrounded my truck and opened the back. What they found will haunt me forever. Huddled in the sleeper cab were 3 people, 2 men and 1 woman, all dressed in filthy rags and wrapped in grimy blankets. One of the men had 2 switchblades on him. None of them said a word as the police cuffed them, but they stared at me with an intensity that sent shivers down my spine. I still have no idea what their intentions were. Maybe they were just looking for a place to hide. Or maybe it was something far worse. Either way, I learned a lesson that night. Always check your truck and trust your instincts. Story 3. My name is David, and I have been a trucker for various companies for over 15 years. The job has its ups and downs, but I enjoy the routine of picking up loads, verifying everything is in order, and delivering on schedule. Being paid by the job rather than by the hour means every second counts, and I pride myself on outworking the younger drivers entering the field. That said, I have a bad habit of pushing myself too hard, especially when it comes to sleep. This story takes place about 4 years ago, while I was working for a warehouse in North Dakota. If you have never been, North Dakota is as flat as a pancake, which can make driving a little easier. Back then, skipping a few hours of sleep often felt like the only way to stay ahead of the game. It was a chilly May morning, the kind that tricks you into thinking summer is here until the wind cuts right through you. Tuesday had rolled in, and with it, a flood of orders that needed shipping. I planned to knock out my deliveries in one go, mapping a straight route into Montana with no intention of stopping for rest. I hit the road after lunch, pushing hard to make my destination by the early morning hours. By midnight, I was fighting to stay awake. The minutes dragged on, and my eyelids felt heavier with every mile. With less than an hour left, I reached for a bottle of smelling salts my buddy Tyler had introduced me to years ago. One sharp sniff would jolt you awake instantly, though he always warned me not to overuse them. It burned my nose like fire, but it worked for a while. Half an hour later, exhaustion came crashing back like a wave. My truck veered slightly onto the shoulder, and the rumble strip snapped me to attention. This was dangerous. I had to pull off the road and rest, but there was no exit, no shoulder, just endless woods on both sides of the highway. I slowed down, desperately scanning for a safe spot. Then I saw it, a purple dress lying right in the middle of the road. I squinted, rubbing my eyes. Was I imagining things? It was real, all right. I eased the truck closer, passing the dress, and shrugged it off as a bizarre coincidence. But then, 100 yards ahead, I spotted a pair of shoes, neatly placed side by side. That was when the unease set in. Something about this did not sit right with me. I clutched the old cross my late father, a devout man, used to carry. "Keep me safe, Dad," I muttered under my breath. Another quarter-mile passed, and my headlights revealed a small pile of clothing scattered across the road. This time, children's clothes. That was enough for me. I stopped the truck and climbed out to investigate. The cold air bit at my skin, but it helped shake off some of the exhaustion. I approached the pile cautiously. There were shirts, tiny shoes, and even a small jacket. Boys' and girls' clothing, all mixed together. I glanced into the woods, my heart thudding in my chest. The dark seemed to swallow everything beyond the reach of my headlights. I felt exposed out there, like something was watching me. Then I heard it, a faint crunch to my left. My head snapped toward the sound. Nothing. 30 seconds passed, and then another crunch, this time from the opposite side of the road. Every instinct screamed at me to get back in the truck. I bolted for the cab, but just as I grabbed the door handle, a child's scream pierced the night. It was chilling, high-pitched, and desperate. I froze. Another scream followed, almost identical to the first. My stomach turned. Were there kids in danger out there? I could not ignore it. I started the truck and turned the headlights toward the woods where the sound had come from. As the beams cut through the darkness, I spotted them. 3 or 4 figures crouched behind trees. One of them was holding a large speaker, the kind you might see at a concert. They ducked out of sight as soon as the light hit them, but I had seen enough. They were trying to lure me into the woods. Panic surged through me. My hands fumbled for my phone, and I started dialing the police. But before I could finish, something slammed against the side of my truck. A heavy thud, followed by another. My headlights caught movement across the road, someone yelling and throwing objects at my cab. One of the projectiles cracked my passenger side window. I was done. I floored the gas and sped off, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. As I glanced in the rearview mirror, I saw a figure standing in the road, shouting something I could not make out. I did not stop until I reached my destination an hour later. The delivery was a blur. I parked, stumbled into a motel, and slept for 10 straight hours. When I woke, I called the police and reported everything. They said they would investigate, but never got back to me. To this day, I have no idea what those people wanted. Were they just trying to scare me? Rob me? Something worse? I will never know, and honestly, I do not want to. What I do know is that I will never stop on a desolate road at night again. Some mysteries are better left unsolved.